The Makwa, one of Mozambique's largest ethnic groups, found themselves particularly targeted, especially as demand soared in 19th century Brazil. Their agricultural expertise was not their saving grace, but their curse, making them desirable laborers for Brazilian plantations. Welcome, esteemed viewers, to Black Heritage Unveiled. Today, we embark on a journey like no other, a voyage across time, space, and memory. We explore a topic as unsettling as it is enlightening, the transatlantic slave trade. But we're not here merely to recount the tales of suffering and loss. We're here to uncover the tribal roots of those who were forcibly taken from Africa to the Americas and illuminate the hidden threads that connect the African diaspora. In sheer scale and duration, the transatlantic slave trade was one of the most monumental tragedies in human history. It spanned over 4 centuries and involved the forced migration of more than 12 million African souls.
Now suggest that as many as 18 million Africans were taken from the eastern coast of Africa, from what is today Kenya.
Still, despite the incomprehensible hardships of the Middle Passage, a journey so treacherous that nearly 10.7 million alone survived, we find the enduring strength of human spirit and culture. This is Black Heritage Unveiled, and you're watching Lost Roots, the African tribal origins of the transatlantic diaspora. Our expedition takes us from the profound depths of Africa's rich pre-colonial history through the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade to the enduring legacies of the African diaspora. Before the stain of the slave trade descended upon it, Africa was not merely a continent, but a vibrant collage of humanity. Its expansive landscapes nurtured an incredible diversity of cultures, languages, and ways of life. The African continent was never the dark or savage land that colonial narratives later claimed. Magnificent empires like the Mali Empire, under legendary rulers such as Mansa Musa, showcased unprecedented prosperity. The intellectual capital of Timbuktu was an epitome of enlightenment long before the European Renaissance. And let's not forget the Songhai Empire, a prodigy in governance and trade. The Ashanti Empire, with its sophisticated bureaucracy and fierce, legendary all-female regiment, or the Kingdom of Congo, whose structured monarchy engaged in diplomacy and trade even before the Portuguese set foot on African soil. Trade was the lifeblood of Africa long before Europeans arrived. Work of arteries formed by trans-Saharan and Swahili coast routes connected Africa to the rest of the world, facilitating the exchange of gold, salt, spices, and textiles with regions as far off as India and China. Religion and social structure in pre-colonial Africa were as varied as the landscape itself. From ancestral worship and animistic beliefs to Islamic practices, Africa was and remains a patchwork quilt of spiritual expression. The 15th century ushered in a new chapter as European exploration increased. Initial contacts, largely by the Portuguese, promised new opportunities for trade and exchange, but they were also the harbingers of a dark era that would devastate the continent. The onset of the transatlantic slave trade. We are diving deep into a chapter that is as devastating as it is pivotal. We take you back to the 15th century, an era that sealed the fate of millions in a story of exploration, exploitation, and unparalleled human tragedy. Before delving into the grotesque and morally abhorrent underbelly of the 15th century's age of exploration, it is crucial to understand the broader geopolitical motivations. European nations, Portugal prominent among them, were propelled by the triad of economic gain, religious propagation, and empire building. Under Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese ships sailed down the African west coast with the primary aim of finding a sea route to Asia. But what they found was more than just new trade routes. They discovered new lands, like the Azores and Cabo Verde, and more ominously, they began to unfold the social and political fabrics of the African societies they encountered. They were the first Europeans to not just explore, but deeply affect African societies. By the mid-15th century, Portuguese trading posts sprang up along the coasts of what is now Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. These weren't merely benign establishments for trade in gold, ivory, and spices. It was a breeding ground for what would become a devastating transcontinental trafficking of human lives, originating from the fertile valleys surrounding the Senegal River. The Wall of People had an advanced civilization with an elaborate political hierarchy. At its apex stood a king, overseeing a sophisticated system of governance that was an amalgam of tribal customs and formal institutions. The Wallof's geographic location and political stability made them one of the first African communities to establish contact with the Portuguese in the 15th century. Initially, this contact was focused on trade, including commodities like gold, ivory, and agricultural produce. However, what started as a symbiotic trading relationship morphed into a nefarious enterprise. The Wolof, with their sophisticated society, could never have envisioned that their engagement with the Portuguese would devolve into their eventual capture and enslavement. Adjacent to the Wolof, the Serer people had their unique way of life, steeped in distinct religious beliefs and societal norms. Like the Wolof, the Serer found themselves in the crosshairs of European ambition. Their initial interactions with European traders, particularly the Portuguese and the Dutch, were marred by a similar descent into darkness. What began as a commerce soon revealed its ghastly underbelly. The Serer, a people deeply connected to their land and their gods, were forcibly uprooted and thrust into the early chapters of the transatlantic slave trade, forever altering the course of their history and the history of the world. Although both the Wolof and Serer experienced unimaginable horrors, they are not mere footnotes in history. Their resilience has meant that echoes of their cultures, languages, and spiritual beliefs have made an enduring impact on modern diaspora communities. As if one colonial power weren't devastating enough, Spain entered the narrative towards the end of the 15th century with their conquest of the Canary Islands and the discovery of the Americas. The Spanish didn't just join the slave trade, they catalyzed its transformation into a machinery of death and despair. Portugal, the initiator of African exploration, later channeled its focus towards Brazil. The 17th century saw this colony flooded with enslaved Africans, making Portugal an enduring player in this inhumane trade. Britain emerged as the dominant force in this grotesque industry by the 18th century. Ports like Liverpool served not just as commercial hubs, but as centers of human exploitation, making Britain the era's dominant force. Spain, with its vast American territories, was a significant player during the 16th and 17th centuries, shipping enslaved Africans across an empire that stretched from the Caribbean to Central America. France zeroed in on the Caribbean, particularly Saint-Domingue. The sugar industry there was built on the backs of African laborers, leaving a scar that remains to this day. The Dutch, although lesser known, also wove a web of exploitation, extending from the Caribbean to South America. Dutch ships plied these waters with an eye for profit, heedless of the human cost involved. These European powers orchestrated a human tragedy with lasting repercussions. Acknowledging this past is a step towards a more conscientious future. Enter the Bakongo, a people of sophistication and order from the Kingdom of Congo, a state complete with governance and social systems. During the 16th and 17th centuries, many Bakongos were seized and ended up in Portuguese and Spanish colonies. But why? Proximity, existing trade ties, and, tragically, the kingdom's political complexities made them prime targets. Shifting our lens to modern-day Angola, we meet the Ovimbundu and Imbundu tribes. When Portuguese traders looked to Brazil, they looked to Angola. The Ovimbundu and Imbundu weren't merely statistics, they were skilled farmers, traders, and craftsmen, and their absence dramatically altered Angola's course. If Angola was a human reservoir, then Ghana's Gold Coast was a treasure chest. The Akan people, with their gold-rich lands, couldn't escape European greed. Gold from the Akans didn't just make trinkets, it lubricated the wheels of colonial empires. Think about that the next time you admire a golden artifact in a European museum. Ever wondered why there's a pulsating Yoruba, Igbo, or Edo influence from the United States to Brazil? Because these tribes face some of the harshest brunts of the slave trade. The DNA doesn't lie. You can trace lineages from African Americans, Afro-Brazilians, and Afro-Caribbeans back to these tribes. From the areas now known as Mali, Guinea, and Senegal, the Mande-speaking tribes, Mandinka, Bambara, Malinke, and the Fulani people were captured in staggering numbers. The Fulani people were predominantly nomadic, cattle-herding communities. Enslaving them wasn't just about labor, it was about disrupting an entire way of life. The mechanisms were diverse but uniformly brutal. Whether captured in conflicts, ensnared in raids, or sold by rivals, the journey was the same: a horrific march to coastal dungeons and a perilous Atlantic crossing where many met their untimely end. Thank you for joining us in this documentary, Lost Roots, the African Tribal Origins of the Transatlantic Diaspora. If you've been as moved by these histories and legacies as we have, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this saga of resilience and remembrance. By the late 18th century, humanity's moral compass began to shift. Enlightenment ideals collided with religious fervor, giving birth to an abolitionist sentiment that gathered momentum into the 19th century. Quakers, evangelical groups, and Enlightenment thinkers began challenging the ethical underpinnings of slavery, providing the ideological weaponry for the fight against this heinous trade. It wasn't just ideologies, it was people, flesh and blood, taking monumental risks to topple this atrocity. Alada Equiano, a freed Igbo slave, bared his soul and the gaping wounds of slavery in his autobiography. Published in 1789, it shifted the tides of British public opinion. In the hall of British Parliament, William Wilberforce waged a relentless war against the trade, leading to the British ban in 1807. And who can overlook the Haitian Revolution? The enslaved rose, and with them, the very foundations of European colonialism trembled. Legal milestones followed these ideological and revolutionary landmarks. Britain, the United States, France, Spain, and Portugal each enacted laws, albeit at different times, to put an end to this vile enterprise. Yet, in a twisted irony, the demand for enslaved Africans surged in some quarters. Take Brazil. Sugar canes bowed under the weight of oppression, and coffee beans bore the scent of bondage. Despite British pressure, Brazil's thirst for enslaved labor was far from quenched. The Hausa, a people traditionally located in the Sahelian regions of West Africa, notably in modern-day Nigeria and Niger, known for their trading cities and complex political structures. One might imagine the Hausa immune to the nefarious transatlantic slave trade, but history is rarely that forgiving. Despite their organized societies, the Hausa could not escape the dark tendrils of the slave trade. Many were captured directly, others were ensnared due to regional conflicts amplified by the ever-looming demand for slaves. Next on our journey is the Oyo Empire, a once formidable power located in Yorubaland in present-day Western Nigeria. Oyo, like many other African states, was not a monolith, but a complex society that had its internal and external pressures. The 18th and 19th centuries saw these pressures reach a boiling point, exacerbated by the insatiable demand for enslaved labor. The Makwa, one of Mozambique's largest ethnic groups, found themselves particularly targeted, especially as demand soared in 19th century Brazil. Their agricultural expertise was not their saving grace, but their curse, making them desirable laborers for Brazilian plantations. Mozambique Island, along with other coastal regions, earned an infamous reputation as hubs for exporting enslaved Africans, with the Makwa being primary victims. The 19th century bore witness to both the abolition and the dreadful continuation of a trade that redefined societies, empires, and human conscience. The Caribbean, where turquoise waters betray a turbulent history. Here, the insatiable demand for sugar forged an insidious pathway across the Atlantic for millions of Africans. The Bakongo's complex cosmology fertilized the soils of Caribbean spiritual traditions, giving rise to powerful syncretic religions such as Palamayumbe and Voodoo. A world away, the Akan from present-day Ghana had complex social systems, including matrilineal inheritance and intricate gold-working techniques. Stripped from their homes, they too left an indelible mark on Caribbean societies. Shifting our gaze to the southern United States, we find a society built upon the anguish and sweat of enslaved Africans, where tobacco leaves and cotton balls narrate silent epics of human endurance. From the spiritual landscapes of Yorubaland, Yoruba traditions were not erased, but rather reincarnated in New World religious systems like Santeria and Candomblé. The Igbo, originating from present-day Nigeria, imprinted their essence upon the social fabric of the American South, influencing realms from music to spirituality. The Mandinka, renowned storytellers, brought the rhythmic cadence of the griot to the African-American narrative, infusing it with layers of deep-rooted heritage. Brazil, with its almost boundless lands, beckoned for labor on its sugar, coffee, and rubber plantations, creating a vortex that sucked in countless African lives. Yoruba and Hausa traditions have become interwoven threads in the vibrant blend of Brazilian religion and culture. The Ovimbundu, primarily farmers and traders from the Angolan highlands, brought their unique cultural practices to Brazil, further diversifying its rich heritage. In Spanish America, enslaved Africans were the bones and sinew of a society that needed them for a multitude of tasks, from the cavernous mines of Mexico to the lush sugar plantations of Cuba. Here, a myriad of African tribes found their traditions blending into a complex cultural mosaic. In Cuba, for instance, Yoruba and Congo traditions mingled to create unique syncretic religions like Santeria. Despite the horrifying upheaval and forced assimilation faced by enslaved Africans, the substance of their diverse cultures did not simply survive, it thrived, morphing into intricate patterns that influenced the entire New World. In the Americas, the soulful strains of jazz, the pulsating beats of samba, the fiery passion of reggae, and the vibrant rhythms of salsa all bowed to their African lineage. The drum, the primal instrument of communication and resistance, is a potent symbol of cultural pride and unity across continents. Celebrations are the canvas upon which the African diaspora paints its most vivid expressions of cultural memory, resistance, and community. Let us explore two such magnificent examples, the Caribbean Carnival and Brazil's Candomblé. Though Carnival has its roots in pre-Lenten Christian traditions, its Caribbean manifestation is a triumphant display of African heritage. As an act of resistance, enslaved Africans would mock their oppressors through masquerades and salute their own ancestry through song and dance. Today, from Trinidad and Tobago to Barbados, Carnival is a dazzling showcase of costumes, calypso, and soca music. It has become a global event, drawing tourists worldwide and standing as an awe-inspiring testament to the Caribbean's African roots. Modern Candomblé ceremonies are soul-stirring symphonies of song, drum, and dance, inducing trances that allow practitioners to channel their orishas. Once marginalized, Candomblé is now an honored component of Brazil's spiritual and cultural mosaic. As we come to the close of our journey through the labyrinth corridors of history, culture, and identity and lost roots, we must pause to reflect on what is perhaps the most awe-inspiring aspect of this tale: the resilience and enduring influence of African tribes within the diaspora. A collage of visuals depicting the Middle Passage, plantation life, and subsequent challenges faced by the African diaspora. This is a journey that was not chosen, but violently imposed, a forced odyssey spanning continents and generations, beset by the horrors of the Middle Passage, the atrocities of plantation life, and the lingering specter of systemic discrimination. Yet, in facing the unthinkable, the African diaspora achieved the impossible through the hauntingly beautiful spiritual sung in the fields, through the defiant rhythms of the drum, through vibrant dances and clandestine ceremonies. They turned sites of oppression into sanctuaries of resistance, cultural expression, and community solidarity. The narrative of the African diaspora is not a sidebar in world history. It is a central chapter written in the indelible ink of resilience, rebirth, and revolution. To engage with it is not just to understand the past, but to actively shape a future where the global Black identity is acknowledged, respected, and revered. This is the story that needs to be told, celebrated, and most importantly, lived by each one of us. If this saga has resonated with you, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share this odyssey of the human spirit.